this Symposia series has each year sort of delved into an intersection of open access and some particular topic that bears closely on open access. So we could do more of a deep dive into some particular part of open access. So unlike the Berlin conference or other great events out there that are sort of about open access generally, this one has annually picked a particular theme to delve into. In the past, we've done things like the intersection of open source software and open access, and how open source software fosters and advances open access publications, for example. Last year, research data and open access. This year, we thought our topic would be particularly provocative to engage with academic publishing, the future of academic publishing, sort of a squarely relevant topic to open access. And I think you'll all agree our keynote set a great tone and sort of background and context for this discussion. So, the panels that we have put together are, we hope, well-rounded with a range of different types of speakers on them. This coming one is around challenges to open access, and we'll have a range of different perspectives on this. And let me give the introductions to our speakers. They will give presentations of about 20 minutes apiece, and then we'll go to Q&A for the entire panel. Jeffrey Beal is the Scholarly Initiatives Librarian at Aurora Library, University of Colorado, Denver. And he's the author of the website called Scholarly Open Access, and that many of you may be familiar with. And his research has appeared in a lot of publications, including College and Research Libraries and Cataloging and Classification Quarterly. Jim Gilden is the editor for Sage Open Sales at Sage Publications, and Jim has worked in publishing for more than 20 years. He's first started at Sage in journals marketing in 1994, and has also held positions there in academic software sales and marketing. He has also worked as an editor at McGraw-Hill and as a freelance journalist whose work has appeared in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, Kansas City Star, and others. Finally, Britt Holbrook is the assistant director of the Center for the Study of Interdisciplinarity and research assistant professor within the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at the University of North Texas. Britt's work since 2005 has aimed to challenge the typical distinctions between research, teaching, and service, according to which faculty members are judged. And I think we'll have an intriguing set of presentations and perspectives from this panel. So I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Martin, and good morning, everybody, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. This talk is the story of the emergence of predatory open access publishers and what I've done to help people avoid being scammed by them. The story begins with me. I've been a librarian for 23 years. I got my library degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1990 and got a job as a Spanish cataloger at Harvard at that time, where I worked for 10 years. In 2000, tired of the East Coast, I took a job at the University of Colorado, Denver, again as a cataloger. My university has two campuses. Our medical campus, called the Anschutz Medical Campus, is located in Aurora, Colorado. I work on the other campus called the Downtown Denver Campus, which is also called the Auraria Campus. If you've ever been to the Denver Convention Center, you might have seen the campus, which is located right behind it. The library is the white building on the lower right side of the picture here. The campus is unique because it's home to 3 higher education institutions, including mine, also a community college, and also the Metropolitan State University of Denver. One library, operated by the University of Colorado, Denver, serves all 3 schools. I worked as a cataloger until last August, when the library administration invited me to take a new position called Scholarly Initiatives Librarian. The title Scholarly Communication Librarian was already taken, but the person with that job has been on medical leave for a couple years, so this title was the next best thing. Throughout my career, most of my research looked at 2 things: the weaknesses of full-text searching and the strengths or advantages of metadata-enabled searching. Starting in 2009, I became increasingly interested in scholarly open access publishing, however. And here's how I got interested in scholarly open access publishers. The thing that initially sparked my interest was the spam emails I kept receiving, and still receive, from open access publishers. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. One of the earliest spam email solicitations I remember was for an open access library science journal. I think this was in 2009. I remember being struck by the unidiomatic term call for paper plastered all over the email and their website. There were additional grammatical and typographical errors all over the publisher's website. I also remember being horrified at the fact that the journal would charge me a fee to publish the paper if it got accepted. This was my first exposure to gold open access, and it was not a happy one. I printed out the email and saved it in a folder. In 2009, I began to write reviews of OA publishers in the journal, the Charleston Adviser. This is a library-oriented review journal that publishes reviews of databases that libraries typically purchase. The journal had a policy of allowing reviews of open access resources, so I submitted one about the United Arab Emirates-based publisher Bentham Open. As time went on, I increasingly began to receive additional spam email solicitations, and many of them were for journals outside my field of library science. Because I had worked so long as a cataloger, it was natural for me to want to keep a list of these publishers, so I began a list. I kept it on my computer at first, and then I published it in late 2010 on an old posterous.com blog I had at the time. This blog platform recently was completely closed down and all its content removed from the internet. No one noticed my list then. It had fewer than 20 publishers on it at the time, and I just kept monitoring my email for new ones and adding them to the list as time went on. Also in 2010, I wrote, cancel that. Also in 2010, I wrote a second comparative review in the Charleston Adviser, which examined 9 different OA publishers, and it is in this review that, with help from Hayworth Press owner Bill Cohen, that I coined the term predatory publisher, a term that has since become a part of the scholarly publishing jargon. A year later, I gathered up all the information I had. This was December 2011, and published my second annual list. One of my librarian colleagues at our health sciences library heard about it and shared it with some others. Soon it was shared with a nursing listserv and forwarded widely. I watched my blog statistics shoot up, 1,000 views, 2,000, 5,000. It was December 2011, and my list had gone viral. Next, in January 2012, I realized I needed a better blog platform, so I switched to WordPress, which hosts my current blog, which is on the screen now, which is called Scholarly Open Access, and it has the subtitle, Critical Analysis of Scholarly Open Access Publishing. The blog is located at scholarlyoa.com. And that won't advance. There we go. Next, I'd like to define some of the terms that I'll be using throughout the rest of the talk. The first thing I want to define is gold open access. I define gold open access as scholarly publishing that is free to the reader with a charge to the author billed upon acceptance of the manuscript for publication. My definition is a little different from the one held by some others, for I make a distinction for platinum open access publishing, which is both free for the author and the reader, and this is usually funded benevolently by volunteer work and other organizational subsidy or sponsorship. The Journal of Library Innovation is an example of a platinum open access journal, as is the journal Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice. A predatory publisher or predatory journal is one that exploits the gold open access model for its own profit. It's easy to see how this happens. With gold open access, the more papers a publisher accepts, the more money it makes. This conflict of interest is too tempting for many, and they accept papers that don't deserve to be called science just to earn the author fee. Ever since I prepared and published my second list in December 2011, I have seen this abuse of the gold OA publishing model literally explode on the scene. Unlike in the past, it is now extremely easy for a publisher to set up shop. Basically, all you need is a website and some unique journal titles. Under the traditional print model, becoming a new publisher required a large investment and presented a significant capital risk. Not anymore. These days, you can set up a new publisher in a day, and I've seen it done. Now I have over 300 publishers included on my main list. Actually, my blog includes 2 lists, one for predatory publishers and one for predatory standalone journals. After the PLOS suite of journals became well-known and established, a bunch of scammers started to copy the mega journal model, setting up individual journals that I sometimes call standalone journals. These independent journals don't publish under any named publisher like PLOS One. They have a broad coverage, accepting almost anything that can be classified as being in the realm of science. Unlike PLOS One, most of the predatory standalone journals are bogus, have a fake or non-existent peer review, and are in operation just for the money. So it's a lot cheaper for a publisher to operate a single standalone journal with a broad coverage than it is for a publisher to operate a fleet of journals, each dedicated to a different field of study, each with its own editor, editorial board, and workflow. Thus, this model, the standalone model, is growing. I should also mention that many of the predatory publishers also operate scam conferences to accompany their journals. Some are now calling these scamferences. I do not track the predatory conferences simply because I do not have the time. I wish someone would start doing this. So if you're interested in this topic, this area is wide open for research and critical analysis. Regarding the criteria for determining which publishers or standalone journals are predatory, I have published this on my blog. Actually, I'm currently on the second edition of the criteria because after I published the first one in 2012, I received a lot of helpful advice and criticism, and I took this advice and came up with a much better criteria document that I published in December 2012 on the screen. The intent of my list is to include basically only the worst of the worst. If a publisher is borderline, that is, if it's really difficult to decide whether it's predatory or not, then I do not add it to my list. I realize there are honest upstart publishers who may be a little sloppy and make mistakes at the beginning, and I endeavor not to include these journals or publishers on my list. Generally speaking, the criteria look at deceptive and non-transparent behavior on the part of publishers. If you're deceptive or if you hide information that publishers conventionally provide, then you may find your publisher on my list. I've received, strike that. I've reviewed books for Library Journal for over 10 years. I review science books, especially books about astronomy, earthquakes, volcanoes, and severe weather. Most of my reviews have been positive, but a few have been negative. I see my work with predatory publishers as a reviewing function. I engage in critical thinking about the publishers and share my thinking, my reviews of them with the world. If you're an academic librarian, I encourage you to share your critical thinking with the world. Here are some of the specific criteria that I use when I examine and analyze potential predatory publishers. Quote, the journal does not identify a formal editorial or review board. The publisher has no policies or practices for digital preservation. The publisher begins operations with a large fleet of journals, often using a template to quickly create each journal's homepage. The publisher provides insufficient information or hides information about author fees, offering to publish an author's paper and later sending a previously undisclosed invoice. The name of a journal does not adequately reflect its country of origin. The journal falsely claims to have an impact factor or uses some made-up measure like view factor, feigning international standing. Now I'd like to talk about scholarly open access publishing itself. I've benefited from open access publishing both as a reader and as an author. Oops. Sorry. I'm a little confused. It's great to have free access to high quality science. It's great to see a bigger impact from my work, including increased citations where my work is open access. My blog is open access. Whenever possible, I try to archive my work in open access venues. The one I use most is called eLIS, E-LIS, or ePrints in Library and Information Science. This is the principal disciplinary repository for library science, and I've been uploading stuff to this free database for years. I'm also a contributor to Wikipedia, mostly in the form of photographs. I specialize in adding pictures of properties on the National Register of Historic Places and of NFL players and of publishing, public transportation. Sorry, I'm a little messed up on the... this is an example of a picture I took when I was here in Dallas in January 2011. This is a selection from a Wikipedia page that's about the City Place Uptown Dart Station, and I took the picture right there and uploaded it to Wikipedia. Still, having said that, I find that the traditional publishing model was the best of all the models that have existed, especially in the context of journals published by scholarly societies. Good publishers add value to scholarship. We need to ask ourselves what is the best model for scholarly publishing, not what is the most politically correct. We are seeing many significant drawbacks to the gold OA model, so we need to evaluate it and see how we can either eliminate these drawbacks or find a better model. Part of the problem with gold OA is that in addition to being an economic publishing model, it's also a social movement, and its adherents are vocal, sometimes intransigent, divided, and sometimes unwilling to question the gold OA model. Is open access really the best model? Are there unintended consequences? Open access publisher Hindawi's profit margin is now higher than Reed Elsevier's. Yet Hindawi is more like a repository than a publisher, just like PLOS ONE. Both focus more on authors than on readers because that's where the money is. They call themselves publishers of journals, but they share more in common with repositories than true journals. Do we really want a publishing model that serves to please the authors more than the readers? Next, I'd like to explain in greater detail some of the main reasons why the predators are problematic. Many gold open access publishers are basically scholarly vanity presses, a model that is sometimes called pay to say. The model works worst in middle-income countries. If you're in a developed country, your funding agency can afford to pay the author fees. If you're in a poor country, you'll probably find an OA publisher that will waive the fees. But if you're in a middle-income country such as China, India, or Mexico, you may be out of luck. The fees are too high for you to pay personally, and there are insufficient funds to go around to help you with paying the fees. Gold OA is threatening research in middle-income countries more than anywhere else. A minute ago, I mentioned scholarly societies and the journals they've been publishing for many years. I think that scholarly societies' journals publish among the best scholarship that our nation produces. In librarianship, we have journals like college and research libraries that are very high-quality journals that benefit the profession greatly. I just wanted to share this other picture I took for Wikipedia. This was taken in Denver in 2009. It's a Cowboys player. He's now with one of the two New York teams. And this was his first away game as a professional. It was in Denver. I think the Cowboys won. And he's a kicker, and the kickers always stay on the field. Before the game, all the players from both teams, they're out on the field practicing, and then they all go inside, but the kickers always stay out on the field. And so I got a great shot of him as he was looking at the Denver Broncos cheerleaders. Because in a minute I'm going to talk about author misconduct, including self-plagiarism, I want to say that the following example is taken from a paper I have under review. So now it's not self-plagiarism because I told you that it's from somewhere else. Learned and scholarly societies and associations, especially those in the humanities and social sciences, stand to lose a lot if the gold OA model were to be implemented universally. The many learned society programs are funded by the income that subscriptions to their journals generate. Imagine a society that has a quarterly journal that publishes 10 articles per issue or 40 per year. Let's say this journal has 1,000 subscribers who pay $100 each for a yearly subscription. This generates $100,000 in revenue per year. Switching to the author pays model and charging an APC or article processing charge of $1,000 per accepted article, the society's annual revenue from this journal would be $40,000, a decrease of $60,000. From a university's perspective, this would be fine, for they no longer would have to pay the $100 subscription fee. However, if one of the school's faculty member gets a paper accepted in the journal, then the university might have to pay the $1,000 fee, resulting in its paying $900 more than it would have for 1 year. Moreover, for the society, the lower revenue means having to cut spending on staff, programs, and services to new professionals. Moving on to author misconduct, I think that predatory publishers increase the amount of author misconduct that ends up being published. Many predatory publishers do not check for plagiarism before they publish papers. Many do not even put their papers through an honest peer review. The result is that predatory publishers' articles are a breeding ground for research misconduct. They are filled with plagiarism, self-plagiarism, image and data manipulation, salami slicing, which is breaking a research project into least publishable units and publishing each as a separate article, ghost authorship, which is when someone helps contribute to a paper but is not properly credited for it, and honorary authorship, which is when someone is listed as a co-author but didn't contribute at all to the paper. Do these instances of author misconduct occur with traditional publishers? Yes, of course they do, but with traditional publishers, peer review essentially continues forever, as we've seen by following the fascinating blog Retraction Watch. Fellow scientists find and report errors and misconduct in published works and report them to the publisher. Then an investigation is conducted and the misconduct is dealt with, often by retracting the article. In the case of predatory publishers, it's rare that they even investigate instances of misconduct. Believe me, I've tried. I sometimes test potential predatory publishers by documenting plagiarism in one or more of their articles and reporting it to them. Sometimes there's no reply and the plagiarism remains. Often the publishers will give me the runaround, resulting in no real attempt to address the plagiarism. I also see that publishers blame the issue on the authors and fail to address it themselves. In a sense, I understand this approach because authors are supposed to warrant that their work is original upon submission, but publishers need to have standard policies for dealing with misconduct that is discovered and reported, and most of the predatory publishers do not. I always check for plagiarism when examining the publishers and journals. I use the manual method because I think it works best in this situation. What I do is this: I read an article, and when the language turns from unidiomatic to idiomatic, I select a phrase and search it as a phrase in Google. More often than not, I get a hit and discover where the text originally appeared. Predatory journals are filled with plagiarism, especially journals published by upstart and smaller publishers. I have a box in my office where I collect printouts documenting cases of plagiarism, duplicate publication, self-plagiarism, and the like. Predatory publishers have greatly enabled author misconduct, and I think it's increasing because of this. There's another way the predatory publishers are threatening both scholarly publishing and science itself. We know that research is cumulative. New research builds on previous research as recorded in the academic record. One of the roles of peer review is to ensure that only true science gets included in scientific journals. There are two terms here that academic librarians need to know about. These terms are demarcation and boundary work. Demarcation deals with differentiating true science from non-science and pseudoscience. One of the roles of peer review then is demarcation. Because many predatory publishers do a fake or non-existent peer review, much pseudoscience is being published as if it were real science. This non-science later gets cited in other scientific articles, and the result is a breakdown of the scientific process. Articles in quality journals may be polluted with citations from counterfeit journals, journals that never conducted an honest peer review. Boundary work is action taken by scientists to enforce demarcation, that is, to enforce the distinction between science and non-science, and to actively work to protect science from pseudoscience. Astronomers do this when they denounce astrology, for example. Speaking of astronomy, there is a journal on my list called the Journal of Cosmology. It specializes in publishing cosmology papers that don't pass peer review in mainstream cosmology journals. The journal's website is amateurish. Its articles often contain cosmological views that depart from mainstream cosmological thinking. The Wikipedia article about the journal gives a lot more information about it and the criticism of it. This is one type of widely distributed journal that the open access movement has enabled. Setting aside issues surrounding free speech, I know that most of us believe that giving alternative ideas a hearing is generally a good thing. In science, though, it's different because the alternative views only serve to defeat the purpose of peer review. That is to say, they don't respect academic integrity. Another thing worth mentioning about predatory publishers is that they are very good at appearing legitimate. They have mastered the art of looking like a legitimate journal. Many are fooled by this. Remember, they work for the authors, not the readers, so when they've gotten the wire transfer from the author or the PayPal payment or the credit card transaction, the deal's done for them. A lot of really smart people have been fooled by predatory journals, and they often later feel great embarrassment about it and become taciturn. This leads to one of the great ironies about predatory journals. Occasionally, they contain some very good research. This happens when they fool a very good researcher or a team of researchers into submitting a paper. Another significant problem with predatory journals is that they don't pay sufficient attention to digital preservation. They may disappear at any time. In fact, most of them don't have any idea of what digital preservation is. They live in the moment, seeking to profit from author fees and not worrying about backing up their content, not that it's necessarily worth backing up. They can also change their model to toll access. This is what happened to most of the journals published by the predatory publisher called Euro Journals, EURO-journals, which of course was not based in Europe, but in Mauritius. For some reason, they took all their content offline and told everyone that it would be available through EBSCO's Econlit database, but I'm unable to confirm that the content is really there. But I can confirm that it's all gone from the internet. So all the article processing charges that people paid to have their content published here is lost, as is the content itself. I think this scenario will repeat itself with variations throughout the coming years. Many of the predatory publishers are one-man operations, and when the man is gone or gets bored with it, the journals disappear forever. I want to read an example of an email I received from a scholar in the UK. I am a junior doctor in the UK, and I received an email from the Omix Publishing group saying that they could offer a rapid peer review process for publishing of academic articles. I went to their website, and it seemed fairly ordinary. I read the instructions for authors and sent off my manuscript in the required format. A couple of months later, I received an email from Omix saying that my article had been accepted for publication, and could I check the proof and pay the author fee. To my horror, I opened the file to find an invoice for $2,700. This fee was not mentioned anywhere obvious at the time I submitted my manuscript, and I never have come across anything like this before. I sent an email saying I could not pay and wanted to withdraw the article. They replied saying, as it now has been assigned a DOI, it is not possible to withdraw, and I can pay the fee in installments. It's totally not true. Do I legally have to pay this enormous fee, and could I be in any sort of legal trouble if I do not pay, end quote. Among all the publishers on my list, Omix Publishing Group's practices are the worst I've observed. It truly deserves the appellation predatory. I think that I intend to do as much as possible to help scholars avoid being caught in their traps. They're very clever in what they do. Their spam emails do not mention the author fees, though they are mentioned on their website. Many of their journals have names similar to established major journals in various fields. They send personalized spam email to researchers, praising an earlier one of the researcher's works and inviting another. This strategy works especially well on junior faculty and graduate students and postdocs who are unfamiliar with the scholarly publishing process. Omix gets prominent scholars to serve on its editorial boards and then uses their pictures and their names and their affiliations on emails and on websites to attract article submissions and conference registrations. Omix is one of the products of the open access movement. The movement has gone astray and is being poisoned by unscrupulous characters. It may be too late to fix it. The validation function that toll access journals once provided is being lost. Part of this story is that sometimes the predatory publishers get angry when they appear on my list. I was once called a cyber criminal by a woman in India. She was angry with me because I pointed out that one of the articles in one of her journals was filled with self-plagiarism. She had never heard the term and told me that authors always have the right to reuse their own work even without attribution. I forwarded her a copy of an Authenticate document about self-plagiarism and didn't hear from her again. I should also say that I prepared this a couple weeks ago, and in that interim period, Omix announced that they will be suing me for $1 billion. So. In December of last year, I was the victim of a criminal impersonation campaign carried out by one of the publishers on my list. He used the email spoofing technique, sending out emails to all the publishers on my list, with the emails appearing as if they were from me, including looking as if they were from my personal email account. The emails offered to remove the publisher from the list for a $5,000 fee. In addition to sending the emails, they also posted copies of them all over the internet, including on bogus blogs and other social media sites. Many of them are still there. As part of one of them. I learned that criminals respond in criminal ways. I've been affected by some legal maneuvering as well. In February of this year, I got an email and a 200-page fax sent at night threatening to sue me if I did not remove the 4 publishing brands of the Canadian Centre of Science and Education from my list and pay $10,000 to the publisher. I learned the difference between a threatening letter and a lawsuit, and fortunately, in this case, the lawsuit has never happened. Also, earlier this year, I requested an investigation about some possible plagiarism that might have been carried out by a professor at a university in Maryland. This professor was the chair of the ethics board at his city's main school district and was a professor of accounting at his university. The story made the front page of the Baltimore Sun. A couple weeks later, I was called into the university counsel's office, we're on a first-name basis by now, and told that were this to turn into a lawsuit that the university would not represent me because reporting plagiarism is outside the scope of my job duties. I've also had the university head of communications ask me to remove one of my blog posts, and I did not. And I've had some university communications staff express concern that the university system president and the university chancellor, and God forbid the university regents, might learn about my research from press reports. In short, the communication office only likes to report on happy things and not about the real world. I wish that my university would be more true to the ideals of academic freedom and place these ahead of public relations. I'm working on defining a concept I call scholarly publishing literacy. The working definition I have at this time, which is also from a paper I have under review, is this. Scholarly publishing literacy is the knowledge of the essential components of scholarly communication, including the ability to effectively judge the quality of scholarly communication outlets and avoid questionable ones, a working knowledge of the various models of traditional and open access publishing and how they are funded, a working knowledge of copyright and other licenses for scholarly works, and an awareness of publishing ethics, including common forms of author misconduct and how to avoid them. I suggest academic librarians develop skills in scholarly publishing literacy. I think this is one of the ways we can show our value to the academy as our role as the custodian of library collections evolves. Earlier, I talked about reviewing books and mentioned that I see my work listing predatory publishers and journals in a similar light. There's another aspect to this that I want to end with. Libraries, in particular public libraries, have traditionally offered a service called Reader's Advisory. This library function involved librarians recommending books to readers. RA usually works with belles lettres, for example, when a library patron asks the librarian to recommend a new Western novel. I think academic librarians ought to adopt the principle of Reader's Advisory to their libraries. However, we need to also adapt the service. Adapt the service. We need to recommend good journals to our patrons, and we need to recommend against predatory journals and publishers for our patrons. Academic librarians will increasingly be asked to make journal recommendations for their patrons. So please prepare for this. Also, academic libraries need to identify the journals they consider predatory or otherwise malevolent and to remove them from all your discovery tools. Otherwise, by including corrupt journals in your library catalog, you are tacitly granting the library's seal of approval to those journals. Help your patrons by removing predatory journals from your library. Just because something is open access doesn't mean it's worth cataloging or otherwise providing metadata for. As Ken Anderson says, more information is not necessarily better information. Open access can be a wonderful publication mode. I know personally that it delivers a higher readership and more citations. However, the abuse of it is contributing to spoiling the quality of scholarly communication, which is increasingly being threatened by scammers. If you support open access, then you need to rise up and oppose the fraudulent work of the predatory publishers and journals. That's what I've been working on since 2009, and I invite you to join me in this effort. Thank you.